What's going on, guys? Ryan here, and today we're going to be testing to see whether or not you should prime before or after you do texture on a wall. So I recently finished a bathroom renovation. Well, more like I added a whole bathroom in my laundry room. In the process, I had to do the drywall, and after mudding it, I was going to add some texture. And I always thought you add the texture and then you prime, because I was told by my dad that you should always prime after you do texture. Because if you don't, the texture itself can soak up more of the paint, or it'll look different if there is any bare drywall behind it. And so you always prime after you do texture. But while I was doing it, right before I was going to do the texture, it said the drywall needed to be primed. I thought, well, great, that adds a whole nother day or two to my timeline. So I ended up doing the priming before and after. And I even read online that a lot of people just do it after. A lot of people do it before. A lot of people don't do it before and after, even though they recommended, hey, you should probably do it before and after. Although I don't. They say that kind of stuff. So then I thought, why don't I test it? Because I want to really know if I'm wasting my time priming before and after, or can I just skip it altogether? Because we're going to test everything here. We're going to test no prime whatsoever. We're going to do prime before texture. We're going to do priming after texture, and then we're going to do both before and after. And we're going to see what the results are. Okay, before we start, I want to try to explain to you how I have this all set up and what stuff I'm going to be using today. I made up this regular 2x4, 16-inch on center, double top plate, single bottom plate, 4 foot by 8 foot section, roughly. And I used a 1/2-inch mold-resistant drywall. And it's a 4x8 sheet, and I just cut it this way, and I made this piece go down and that piece go up. So down in the middle, there is a factory butt joint. I decided to do that way because I wanted to see if you could see the tape or see the mud through the paint or through the primer or through the texture at all, because this is like the best scenario that you could have in your own project. Now I have it divided up between the different sections here, and I'm actually going to go ahead and put some tape to make it even more obvious, and so I don't do prime on this side or prime on that side when I'm not supposed to at the same time. So for texture and for mud, I'm using the USG Beadex brand. For the texture, I'm using the Fastex, and then for the mudding, I just use the all-purpose. Now, I don't think there's a huge difference between the two, but I'm using products that are meant to be used in this way. And for the texture gun, I'm just using this Homex brand. I'll be using the recommended settings for the air pressure. I think it's around 70 psi. And I'll also be doing the orange peel texture. To me, it is the best texture to do, and I don't have to do anything else like knockdown or do anything with like a roller or paintbrush or anything. We're going to do orange peel. Over here, we just got the Wooster brand. Shed resistant, woven, whatever. It felt like it was the right type of roller, one of the best rollers to use, and it's not that expensive, even compared to the cheap brand. And then we have just a regular paint tray and a paint roller. And then for the drywall primer, we have the Kills PVA primer, and I read it yesterday, and I found out that it reads that if you're going to use any other sheen other than flat or satin, you should use the all-purpose primer. I probably would have done that if I read it beforehand, but we're going to use this. It specifically says drywall primer, and it does say to do it before you do texture. Now for the paint, I'm using Behr Marquee satin, just ultra pure white. It's not the best Behr, but it's also not the cheapest Behr. It's kind of like in the middle. I'm deciding to use that because I think it might be the best way to do it, and also that's the paint that I'm using in my own bathroom, so I didn't have to buy more paint, because who needs to be buying a bunch of paint when you don't need to. Last thing is this 10-in-1 painter's tool. I actually was gifted this from Rolling Dog, and it is actually really nice. It's all stainless steel, but I will talk more about it later when we get to this project, because I've already kind of used this on my last project, and I really do like it. Alright, before I actually start, I'm going to put tape on these lines so then we know which section is which. And then after that, I'm going to go ahead and do the primer for this section and this section. And I'm going to let that dry, and after that, we'll continue on. Alright, so I let the primer dry for a couple hours, and now we gotta do the texture. I already have some mixed up here. I'm hoping it's enough. If not, I'll just grab some more and mix up some more. But I'm going to hook it up, do a test spray over there, and then I'm going to go ahead and do the orange peel. I'm going to have it set at 70 psi and the regular orange peel tip, and as little flow as possible, and we'll see what it looks like. Alright, the texture is dry, and I replaced the tape again, and I realized while I was doing it that there is a huge difference between having primer and no primer at all. And because this one doesn't have primer yet, it's the same as this one, and that one is the same as this one. You can totally tell where you taped and where the screws are. With the primer, you can't really tell. I mean, maybe a little bit, but you can't tell really at all. With that being said, next thing like I have to do is put primer here and there, and then wait for that to dry, and then paint it. Okay, the primer is dry, and just looking at it this morning, this one you can kind of see through, and you can kind of see where the factory joint is. But I think it's also different in color, mainly because this one is just the texture on top of the primer, and while these are actually primed, and so it looks a little different just because of the color of the texture. Now those two actually look the same to me. I can't tell the difference between those two. This one obviously you can, but this isn't the final product. Now I'm going to go ahead and paint the whole thing, and after it dries we can come back and do some tests to see if we, one, can notice a difference between the four of them, and two, if they actually hold up to some damage or to some scuffs or bumps and whatever. Alright, so Rolling Dog sent me this 10-in-1 painter's tool, and I actually kind of like it. It's made of stainless steel and it has a variety of uses, like cleaning out cracks, scraping, pulling nails, opening paint cans, cleaning paint rollers, and it even has a bottle opener. If you would like to get yourself one of these, head to the description down below, and thanks for Rolling Dog for sending me this. Now back to the video. Alright, so the paint is dry. I've let it dry for several hours. It says it'll be dry in 1 hour and recoat in 2 hours. I only did one coat. I was thinking about doing 2 coats, and I think I probably even mentioned in the beginning of the video I was going to do 2, but I only did 1, and I'm going to be honest here, visually speaking, I can't tell a difference between the 4 of them, but if you touch them, you can tell there's a difference. So over here, this is no primer with just paint on top. It's a little rough, but not bad. This one is primed before, and it kind of feels the same thing as this. This one is a lot smoother. It feels like a painted surface rather than a non-painted surface. This one is probably the best feeling, but these two feel almost exactly the same. And like I said, visually, I can't tell that these are different. I can't tell that there's a joint here. I can't tell any of the screw holes. I cannot tell by just looking at it. And you really should let paint cure for like a week or several weeks. And this paint on the container, it says something about in 7 weeks there's like a little film that develops that you can wipe off. That film is like mold resistant, but I'm not going to wait 7 weeks to finish this video. But I can't just give you what it looks like and what it feels like. I'm going to do some scuff marks with my boots. I'm going to get my hammer to see if anything comes off if I just rub my hammer along the wall. And I'm going to get a chisel to see if the texture comes off easily. Because I have a feeling that no primer whatsoever, the texture is going to chip off. The prime beforehand, I think the texture is going to chip off. But the prime after and the prime before and after, I think those are going to be totally fine. I think this one is probably still the best option, but obviously you have to do prime twice, and then you have to paint, and that's a lot of steps and a lot of money to sink into this project. So I would say, just from looking at it, you can do no primer whatsoever. However, we're going to do some tests real quick to see if the durability has changed at all. Alright, so first up is going to be my boot. I'm just literally going to, not necessarily kick the wall, but I'm going to rub up against the wall with my boot. So they actually look pretty similar. I'm going to do that one more time. I felt like these two felt more gritty, like I'm taking some of the texture off. And I think I did right here. Nope. So now we're going to do my hammer, and I think I'm going to take it like this. I'm going to rub up against the wall with my hammer. That literally didn't look like it did anything. We got a little paint chip there. A little paint chip there. A little bit there. I don't see much on this one. I did notice that I missed a little bit of a spot here for the paint. But let's I actually don't think that really did much for any of them. I think it kind of was relatively the same amongst them all. Kind of like with the boots. Although, like I said, with the boots, these two felt like a little bit coarser. Like it was almost like sandpaper on my shoes rather than those. But let's do one more. So I have a chisel here. It's not super sharp, but it is still a chisel. And I want to see if the texture, how easy it is for it to come off so you can scrape it off. That seemed pretty, it definitely dug behind the texture and into the drywall itself. This one kind of felt like more of like it's scraping the texture. I think they're both kind of doing the same exact thing. I feel though as if this one might be a little bit easier to scrape off. I'm not quite sure. Alright, one last test with some duct tape. I want to see if it peels any of the paint off. Alright, let's do the first one. A little bit, not much. Even less. Nothing. And that was a little bit. I'm going to show you up close to what these look like. But before I do that, I want to say the instructions on the texture say to prime the wall before you do the texture. Usually before you paint, you do primer. When a paint is a primer and paint in one, it's kind of like 2-in-1 shampoo or body wash. It does an alright job for both shampoo and body wash. But if you have a specific shampoo, it does a better job than the 2-in-1. I think we may all agree on that. But if it were me in my own house, which I am doing currently, is prime before and after. Prime before you texture and after, and then you paint. I would say, just following the directions, this one, I think you should, I think feeling it is not as smooth. It's a little bit rougher than this one or this one. And I like the smoother feeling of a wall rather than it being like nasty. Because you can probably scrape yourself if you bump up against this. So let me go ahead and show you what these look like up close. Alright, so here's the wall with no primer. Here's the piece of tape. You can see the little white flecks in it. Here's where I did the chisel. And you can see some of the texture rub off. And you can see how it goes to the drywall and even behind the tape or behind the paper of the drywall. Right here is kind of where the hammer was, and these little spots here are where I missed with the paint. And then down here is where my boots were, which honestly just feels a little rough. That's all. I think this held up fairly okay. But let's move on to priming before. This is the piece of tape. And there is a very small amount of white. So here is the chisel. And you can tell that some of the texture came off with it. Here's where I like dug in the side of it. This is kind of roughly the area with the hammer. All of them look the same with the hammer. Shoe. Nothing really different between these two. But let's move on to priming after. On this one, I don't see any white on the duct tape. Here's the chisel. Pretty much the same. Here's that piece. Hammer. And my boots. Now again, I don't know how to even describe it to you, but this feels a lot smoother, a lot softer than this. This feels kind of rough, like sandpaper. Moving over to priming before and after, there is actually a significant amount of white on this piece of tape. And then we have a little bit more. I dug in a little bit harder right here to see if it changes anything, and it does. But this right here is kind of what all of these kind of look like, in my opinion. And then the hammer, nothing different, and my boot. All right, so what did we learn? Well, priming before you do texture doesn't seem to do much of anything other than feeling different if you prime after versus before. Before, more like sandpaper. After, a little bit more like drywall. I would recommend to do priming before and after texture. Doing no priming whatsoever doesn't seem to do too much different between doing priming before. After is really the only thing that feels different because of the way the wall feels. But if you were going to do 2 coats of paint, I think it would probably feel more like this. Now your results could be totally different from mine because of the paint, because of the primer, because of the texture, the brand, and also because of the mudding and also the drywall itself. Now, I try to keep it between 50 to 70 degrees in my shop. I didn't have the HVAC system on throughout the night, but I made sure to come in here in the morning to turn it on before I actually painted or primed or even textured. And so I try to keep it between the 50 to 65, 70 degree mark. Also, the brand and type of paint that you use would probably give you completely different results. So I think if I were to do this again, I would take your suggestions on some of the paint brands or the priming, the different types of primers. We have like all-purpose primers, we have specific drywall primers like I used, and also the different types of texture, brands of texture, and what they're for, and even maybe different texture types. And what if we did no texture whatsoever? Maybe that'll be another video. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are and what you would do with your own walls. Would you prime before or after texture, or would you do both, or no primer whatsoever? Also, let me know if you would like to see any other types of videos like this, me experimenting, testing things out. And if you would like to see me redo this test with maybe different brands of paint and primer, just let me know down below. And thank you, because that'll be it for today's video. If you liked it, be sure to smack that like button as hard as you can. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, help me a lot, and turn on post notifications. And I'll see you guys all next time.